Ballot item number 32, Order M-168, second reading of Bill 168, an act to amend the Financial Administration Act. Mr. McNaughton.
The member from Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading of Bill 168, an act to amend the Financial Administration Act.
Mr. McNaughton has moved second reading of Bill 168, an act to amend the Financial Administrative Act pursuant to Standing Orders 98. The member has 12 minutes for his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. I'm really happy today to debate my private member's bill, capping Ontario's debt bill. And at the outset, I want to say to the MPPs, this is nothing new in North America or across the world. Kenya, Poland, Denmark, Alberta, all three Canadian territories, and the United States have a debt cap bill in those jurisdictions. Speaker, it's no secret I am deeply concerned with our growing debt in this province. Ontario is the most indebted province or state in the world, so it's obvious this is a real issue. There are many reasons why I think we need to take our skyrocketing debt seriously and introduce a debt cap as an additional measure of accountability. In the limited time I have today, I'll do my best to explain why this new measure I'm introducing is so important. Fundamentally, this bill is about protecting future generations while holding politicians of all political stripes accountable for the dollars that they spend. The technical details of what this bill would do if enacted is to provide that the Crown is not authorized to raise money by way of loan or to receive money through the issue and sale of securities if the effect of doing so would cause Ontario's net debt to exceed 45% of its GDP. So our debt would be capped at 45% of GDP. Speaker, the budget passed by the Liberal government will push our debt to over $300 billion for the first time in our history. Wow. In just 9 years, this government has driven Ontario's debt-to-GDP ratio from 27% to about 40%, a whopping 48% increase. With a high burden of debt, we are less able to respond to financial crises, leaving the families and businesses of this province vulnerable. Right now, interest rates are extremely low, but they're not always going to be this low, Speaker. And our debt represents a huge liability if those rates go up or if our credit rating is downgraded even further. Even now, our debt servicing costs divert funds away from other programs. Speaker, I brought forward this bill because I believe the public deserves greater accountability. The people of this province understand we're in a poor financial situation, but they don't see a real plan from this government on how to deal with it. They're seeing irresponsible spending on scandals and incompetence, like SAMs, the gas plants, $5 billion in corporate welfare every year, paying to get rid of excess electricity, too many blunders to name here. And then they're seeing cuts to services they depend on, like healthcare and education. And there's no end in sight, Speaker. The Liberal government has tried to frame the conversation around our growing debt to make it as flattering as possible for themselves. For 7 years in a row, they've created artificially high projections for the deficit, and lo and behold, each year they beat the target they created. In fact, I'm sure we'll be hearing about that a few times this afternoon. They say they are on track to balance the budget, but the Auditor General has been clear, and I quote, "Net debt and total debt are both expected to continue growing in absolute terms even after the province starts to run annual budget surpluses. This important fact should not go unnoticed by members of the legislature and the public," unquote. Speaker, the government is also relying in their budget on extraordinarily optimistic revenue numbers. In that document, they project revenues will grow at a rate of 4.6% between now and 2019, and at a rate of 5% for the next 3 years. This includes a 7% revenue growth over the next year alone. Meanwhile, the Financial Accountability Officer is also optimistic, but still projects only 3.3% revenue growth over 3 years. So the government says 4.6%, the FAO says 3.3%, while the real revenue growth since 2008 has only averaged 2.6%. And Speaker, the scary thing is that it's unlikely that they'll even achieve the numbers that they've set out. And while the government may be able to use such tactics to successfully change the conversation of the day, they won't change the reality of the balance sheet. Speaker, our debt is continuing to grow. 30 years ago, the provincial debt was a manageable $31.5 billion. 9 years ago, it had grown to $153 billion. Today, it has doubled to our current $308 billion. Speaker, the people of Ontario are already feeling the consequences of this reckless fiscal management. Even with historically low rates, Ontario spends almost $1 billion every month just to service the debt. And just as the Auditor General warned, this cost is crowding out critical programs and services. This week and today, we have seen many distraught parents in this House rallying outside, justifiably upset to be threatened with the loss of vital services for their children. And Speaker, as a father myself, I find this unimaginable. Demonstration schools and autism services for children over 5 years old are on the chopping block because of this government's poor financial management. We can't allow our children and the vulnerable to pay endlessly for the waste and scandal we've witnessed under this Liberal government. Speaker, we have a duty to legislate with the good of our children and our children's children in mind. A debt cap certainly won't solve this issue, but it would serve as a safeguard to make the government more accountable. If we reach a level of debt on the threshold of 45% of GDP, the government would have to return to this House and answer to the people of this province for their decisions. This government has done their best to keep the public from having a real conversation about government spending and priorities. We saw that clearly, Speaker, with the introduction of the budget before the report on pre-budget consultations had ever been written. It's also clear from the lack of disclosure on how this government is spending taxpayers' money. But despite the barriers the government has put up against meaningful engagement, the people of this province are eager to have their voices heard. Speaker, in support of this bill, I've been touring around the province and engaging online with people from across Ontario to discuss why and how we need to tackle the debt. From Ottawa to Lambton-Kent-Middlesex and the GTA, and of course a few visits to Sarnia-Lambton, people were eager to share their thoughts on how we can get Ontario back in the black. Rather than sitting down at my kitchen table on a Saturday evening to draft up a plan, I went out to meet with economists, business owners, parents, community activists, young professionals, students, and think tanks. On this Back in the Black tour, we discussed a broad range of ideas to make life more affordable in Ontario, get rid of barriers to productivity, and get our province growing again. Speaker, I heard loud and clear that the Drive Clean program and the death tax are seen as nothing more than a shakedown. People want these programs gone. And with the cost of administering and enforcing these bad initiatives, the province would be further ahead by doing away with them. I spoke with real estate agents and current and aspiring homeowners. They brought forward suggestions to make it easier to buy and sell a home in this province, such as capping property tax at inflation and eliminating the land transfer tax. Speaker, taxes were something I heard about over and over again anywhere in the province. There is a feeling that our tax code is outdated and overly complex. One idea that I heard was to immediately form a committee charged with bringing forward recommendations and a sensible plan to begin modernizing, simplifying, and flattening Ontario's tax code. I also heard that we should be looking at shifting the tax burden from income to consumption. I also heard time and time again about the ORPP. Both business owners and employees are deeply concerned about the ORPP is going to impact them personally and about the money it's going to pull out of the economy overall. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, corporate welfare is another issue that really has people upset. They want their government creating the conditions for businesses to succeed by focusing on the basics: affordable energy, investing in infrastructure, and balancing Ontario's budget, not handing out money in secret without qualification criteria or tracking of results. Speaker, we have over $300 billion of debt. Handing out $5 billion annually, mostly to private, profitable corporations, is disgraceful when services for autistic children are being crowded out by the budget crunch this government has created themselves. Speaker, I won't get into all the issues discussed in this tour because I simply don't have enough time. but I want to encourage the party across the aisle, the government, in the strongest terms possible, to revisit their approach of top-down governance and listen to the people of Ontario. People want a strong, stable economy that represents their priorities. And not only are they being left out of the conversation by the Liberals, they're having their futures compromised by a government that won't take responsibility for its poor financial decisions. A debt cap would help protect future generations while holding politicians accountable for the dollars that they spend. While the majority of feedback I've heard on this bill so far has been extremely positive, there is one critique that has come up, and that is that if we're going to have a debt cap, it should be lower than 45% of GDP. And Speaker, I have to say, I absolutely agree. I would love to cap the debt at 40 or 42% of GDP. Unfortunately, with the Liberal track record on racking up debt and the nature of a majority government, it seemed even a debt cap as high as 45% would be unlikely to get enough support to pass. Reaching a level of debt equivalent to 45% of GDP warrants a thoughtful public discussion and marks a point at which serious measures of accountability for policymakers should be in place. This cap is the least we should do, and it absolutely should be done. To be honest, I'm not expecting much from the government on this bill, Speaker. Our provincial debt sits at over $300 billion, and it's obvious they haven't any ideas on how to fix it besides burning the furniture to heat the house. I've heard loud and clear, Speaker, and I'm sure all the members have as well, whether it be sky-high hydro bills, lack of a good job, and sufficient income to make ends meet, or the ever-increasing cost of living for things like food and transportation. For many in this province, Speaker, times are very tough. And thanks to our $308 billion provincial debt, it's going to get tougher and tougher as we go along. Speaker, we can't keep going down this road of endless borrowing. If the government is serious about getting a handle on the debt, they should welcome this measure and support my private member's bill, Bill 168. Thank you.